Greetings, fellow questionably animated corpses. Tiki here, and welcome to the Main Street Cinema, the show where we discuss the finer points of filmmaking. And with me today is writer and director of Super Academy, Mr. Jacob Gulliver. How you doing, Jacob?
Hello, I'm doing wonderful. I'm delighted
to
be here to talk about what is ostensibly one of the weirder movies I've ever seen.
One of the weirder movies we've ever seen, but also, in my humble opinion at least, probably my personal favorite movie of the year so far out of everything I've seen. It's a tough pick, but I've got to go with it. I've got to go with my heart.
It's up there. Yeah, that's
it's so unlike anything I've ever seen in the theater. It's an experience. It's not for everyone, and I kind of feel like we're going to break down a lot of those points here. So,
sure. Yeah.
So, first of all, Jacob, do you want to kind of do some movie machine plug-in?
Yeah, absolutely. I represent Hot Chocolate Media. We're a local media production company in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, and we produce all kinds of fun, geeky content that's available for free through the internet whenever you would like. So anybody who's interested can go and check out any of our web series. We have Fang and Talon and Super Academy, and we have two podcasts, The Movie Machine, which is a show where we make up a movie really fast based on a random suggestion from the internet. And then we've also got Campaign Comedy, which is a game of Call of Cthulhu played by a bunch of local comedians. So we've got a whole lot of fun stuff that's available out there if people are interested.
HotChocolateMedia.net.
All right. Yes, thank you.
So, you know what? The Movie Machine, this movie kind of reminds me of a movie that would be generated by the Movie Machine. Let's just start there. Let's just start there.
Yeah, you're not wrong. It's a weird
we've got
concept.
Daniel Radcliffe and Paul Dano, fart jokes, a corpse, Castaway, and then Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically like, it's just those ingredients mixed together, and it's crazy.
Yeah, it makes just a really weird but somehow good smoothie of a movie.
And the weirdest thing is, I'm not, like, I've always been the guy who's like, I don't like fart jokes. Fart jokes are very lowbrow. Meh.
Mm-hmm. But they acknowledge it that way, too. Like, the whole, at the beginning, yes, there's, like, fart jokes, and Paul Dano is, like, unhappy, and he's, it's like, oh, farts, gross, and he's, like, furious that there's all these farts and uncomfortable and gross, but then by the end of the movie, then it, like, makes more sense. And, it's like, yeah, but this is something everybody does. It's not like, a weird, unusual thing. It's something that happens. We should just, accept that and not be weird about it. And that's the whole message of the movie. And they hammer it home through a million different ways.
Yes. I mean, I don't even know where to start with this one. Let's start with, how exactly did you discover this movie, Jacob? Because I know it was playing, like, for me, it was playing at my local movie theater, which does kind of cater to kind of having, like, half of it is, like, your big budget, like, Marvel, like, freaking Secret Life of Pets came out, that, like, those big budget, like, studio releases. And then half of it is stuff like this, where it's like, we might get something like this, or something like The Shallows came to our theater. So just kind of like those lower, those kind of like smaller scale, but not necessarily off the radar movies. And so I saw this kind of just on our marquee, and I had no idea what to think about it. I wasn't really, I want to say it was the weekend that, I can't even remember now. I'm sorry. It was the weekend maybe Finding Dory was released or something like that. So I had, but then I remember I listened to the Collider Movie Talk podcast, and they were just simply talking about, Daniel Radcliffe does a really good job in in this movie playing a corpse. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I got to see that movie.
Yeah.
Like, I love Daniel Radcliffe. I love Paul Dano, and I think this is Paul Dano's best performance he's ever given. But, yeah, just overall, I was recommended it through Collider. Not necessarily, they weren't even recommending it. They were just kind of, like, talking about the premise of the movie and talking about Daniel Radcliffe as an actor. And I was like, okay, like, if that's what that Swiss Army Man movie's about that's playing at my local theater, I'm into it. Let's go. That sounds like a fun way to spend an afternoon.
Yeah.
So what about you? How do you find out about it?
Yeah, I remember hearing, like, some talk about, like, Daniel Radcliffe was a while ago, saying like I'm in an interesting movie coming up. Yeah, I play a corpse in it, and just thought, oh, that's interesting. But I kind of watched away and then forgot about it. And then a few months ago, after Swiss Army Man got accepted to Sundance, I finally saw a trailer because they put out a trailer to promote it. One of my buddies from film school had posted the trailer, so I watched it, and my brain just like exploded. Just like, I don't know what to think about this. Like, it looks really beautiful. The performances seem compelling. This could be really interesting, but this is also kind of gross. I don't know if I'm gonna like this.
Yeah.
So that was what I was thinking when I watched the trailer, and I posted, and I think I said something, like what, like it's slightly bigger every time, like a small what, then a medium what, and then a huge what. Because I didn't know how to feel about it. Just like, this is a thing. Somebody made this.
Well, I think that's the beautiful thing about the movie, Jacob, and I think you, of course, as an independent filmmaker, can very much respect it. This movie was made by a team that just calls themselves Daniels, and it's two, I think, friends by the name of Daniel. Their first name is Daniel. I'm sorry, I don't have their last names in front of me, but I think that's a really interesting way to brand themselves, just Daniels. And yeah. I think this is a really strong mission statement for them going forward in the future. They've done a couple music videos before then. Their music videos have kind of like leaned on this kind of bodily humor, but done in kind of like this dark, subversive, kind of quirky way. And this movie is definitely kind of like a feature-length version of that to a certain extent, but there's a lot more going on here. Like, I feel like this movie, the reason why I like it so much, for me at least, is you can just dig into it. It can mean any number of different things, and you can take away any number of different interpretations of it, and every interpretation will be right.
Yeah.
All right.
That's absolutely true. I would say, just one quick note on the Daniels thing. They managed to cast two actors who also have Dan in their name, Dano and Daniel Radcliffe, which made me very, very happy. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right about taking away, different ideas from it. And I mean, the big idea for me is that, Paul Dano is learning how to, socially interact with people by explaining the world to Daniel Radcliffe. And until he's, externalized those ideas of, what it means, he hasn't really, gone through more than a subconscious or surface level analysis of it. And when he can externalize that by teaching him, then he actually starts learning things about himself and trying to better himself in a lot of ways. So I think that's kind of like the whole thing is like, if we don't bother communicating, if we don't bother putting ourselves out there, then we're never going to get anything out of it. We're never going to be who we want to be. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. The whole thing just very much it's just, like we said at the very beginning, it feels like nothing else. It's got this song that runs through the whole thing that I kind of posted on Facebook, where it's like, this should be a contender for Best Original Song at the Oscars. Seriously. Because it runs throughout the whole song, and it's amazing how they do it. Yeah. And it's the song's just called Montage. And
they even address that in the lyrics, too. In the song. All we ever needed was a montage.
Oh, God.
So good.
I just love how the movie starts, like, right away on this very, very quirky, it's, the dark opening with Paul Dano just right on the verge of killing himself, right with the noose around his neck. And then just kind of the unlikely thing of seeing Paul Dano or seeing Daniel Radcliffe washed out on the beach. And it just kind of goes from there. To tell you the truth, it almost kind of reminds me of, I don't know, this movie, I feel like it wears its influences on its sleeve, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Or maybe it's just because I'm a filmmaker and I really appreciate very quirky, like directorial, like Archers. The soundtrack in this reminded me of Punch Drunk Love, if you've ever seen Punch Drunk Love.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of, indie light rock sound.
Well, yeah, not only that, but just in the way that it kind of like weaves its way throughout the narrative in both a diegetic and a non-diegetic way. So, I don't know. And then I definitely think Michel Gondry is like a huge influence here. I think like, I'd be shocked if they weren't influenced by the work of Michel Gondry, especially in the middle section, like you said, where you had like the whole point where they're communicating. You know, Paul Dano, he's basically like learning to live again and learning to have hope again, and learning to kind of come back into the world that he once abandoned by showing this corpse, you know, what he believes to be the world. And in those sequences, I think those sequences are probably the most visually distinct, and I don't want to say they're a ripoff of Michel Gondry, certainly not, but it definitely like evokes kind of like the tone of Michel Gondry, where
it's like the sort of dreamlike state that Michel Gondry has in a lot of his films, where it's augmented reality, it's on top of what's real.
Absolutely.
I definitely felt like there was some, a little bit of Wes Anderson type stuff in there in terms of like, framing, or the way that, the way that it was cut. The edit where he finds the berries and he goes to like grab the berry.
Yeah.
And he's like dancing in front of the bush, and then cut to him vomiting. That was like straight out of a Wes Anderson piece, all visual storytelling with like, slightly, amped emotions, a little bit silly.
Some of the critics have called this kind of like essentially a string of SNL skits tied together, and I don't really agree with that at all, because
I don't think that's true at all.
Because I could see, like, it is very outlandish sequences. It's like, literally, it's like you start the movie, it's like, oh, hey, here's this farting corpse, and the farts are apparently radioactive, so I can use him to get off of this island. And then it's like, the scene that's kind of like the climactic scene in the trailers is actually the scene that really kind of starts out the whole thing, where Dano is on Radcliffe's back, water skiing, and and using the farts as the propeller. So
yeah.
I thought that was a clever way to edit the trailer as well, because it looks like this big kind of like climatic moment, but nope, it's just the opening scene. Like, you haven't seen anything yet.
They did show a lot of like the montage aspect in the trailers, but they didn't show much in terms of the way of like the emotional connection and like the character development with the two, which I think is, what I was most surprised by in terms of the the way that they were learning from each other and growing as people.
And let's just get into it right now. Let's just kind of like cross the threshold of this conversation.
Sure.
So my interpretation is that Manny is in Paul Dano's head. Like, Manny is actually there, of course, as a corpse. Paul Dano is carrying him around, but he is not actually alive. He's not actually cognitive. It's just like it's a figment of Paul Dano's imagination to keep him sane, and it's kind of like him working through his issues. What do you think?
I mean, I feel like he has that like scene where he's singing out loud, "I'm going crazy," and there's at that time at that moment in the film I would have agreed with you, but I think the depth at which they converse and the fact that they have some differences in opinion throughout the movie, to me, means that they're that he was alive, and whether it was some kind of kooky magic, or it was just a I don't know, whatever it is, I don't really care all that much. I think he happened to be there, and he happened to be animated in some way.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can look at it essentially as magical realism, and I think
absolutely.
Especially the whole thing with the title, with the Swiss Army Man concept, which really, like, that title is fine. I don't know. I don't necessarily think that title kind of reflects what the movie's about entirely. I could be wrong about that, just because I felt like the Swiss Army Man concept only kind of related to about 10 minutes of actual, like in the middle of the movie where they're like, they're shooting down the birds and, like, and doing all that stuff. And I know, but then again, Daniel Radcliffe is very multi-purpose throughout the whole movie. So
yeah, I'm your multi-purpose tool guy.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah, I take that back. It's an appropriate title.
That line was so funny. It's like you expected it to be the cheesy, put the title in the movie moments, and he just
right.
Your multi-purpose tool guy. Yeah.
Because honestly, when I first heard the title Swiss Army Man, I literally thought it was like about some like because the Swiss are known for being neutral in politics, and I literally thought it was like this true story drama about some like Swiss Army man who was like, no, fuck being neutral. I'm gonna fight in this war. God damn it! That's literally what I thought it was by the title. I was like, Swiss Army Man. It's gotta be like a true story about some heroic Swiss person who fought in the wars and whatnot. And oh boy, it's not that. It's not that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the movie does a good job of alternating between slow scenes and fast scenes, which a lot of movies don't do very well. They have a good sense of pacing. They know when there's an emotional moment or a point of conflict where they need to slow stuff down. And that, as a whole, really worked for me. We get moments of speed where we get a little bit of that montage and things progressing and, them building. And then there would be another point of conflict or another point of conversation where, they wanted to express something or something new was happening. It was progressing them on their journey. And I think, that was just a really strong way to tell the story. I think they spaced it out really well. There wasn't really a whole lot of dead air in the movie, and so it wasn't something where you lost interest at any point.
Yeah, I like none of it felt repetitive at all. It definitely it kind of bounced that thin line. Like it was like part ways it was magical realism and just almost kind of like a where the wild things are style, like wild rumpus through the woods, you know what I mean, at some points. But then other points it would slow way the hell down and be like, all right, we're going to contemplate about the meaning of life, the meaning of death, and the meaning of having a friendship and having a relationship with someone who may or may not even be cognitive.
Right.
This might be happening in my own mind. And Jacob, you've got to admit, I know the movie is ambiguous. You've got to admit it's ambiguous.
Yeah, they don't give you any like real clues. There's no, secret island, tribal mysticism that awakens the corpse. That's like, that's that's not
anything.
How it works.
It's just weird pseudoscience.
Yeah, I think that the path that he's on is the path to Paul Dano's character Hank, to Hank's own awakening, because he's as he self-analyzes, as he becomes more self-aware of like his own actions, then we see Daniel Radcliffe, his character Manny, grow as well. So I like that aspect of it where as he's awakening, so is Manny, and he's becoming more cognizant, and he's eventually able to move himself and talk and think in complex sentences. And
yeah, that's a good point about how Manny like eventually does kind of like it's a big moment when he does start to move on his own, and it's really built up.
Yeah.
So because throughout most of the movie, what really was kind of having me going about this theory I was having with him being in the head, where was most of the time Paul Dano was dragging Daniel Radcliffe around, kind of, puppeteering his arms and whatnot. And what I thought was kind of like a brilliant part of Daniel Radcliffe's performance through a good part of this movie was just the fact that he basically just have to have like the dead expression on his face while not moving anything, while still trying to emote and give a good performance.
Yeah, the 1,000-yard stare.
Right. Like it's pretty impressive. Yeah,
he did very good. When he was like learning how to smile, that like awkward like smile that he did, it's just like, man, how did he do that? Like, you have to think about like how you figure out all those tiny little facial expressions that they were doing. But yeah, particularly Daniel Radcliffe, some of the expressions that he gave while still maintaining the sort of dead, flat eyes, it's really tough.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's like a lot of this movie is a tightrope. I keep going back to the tightrope analogy because I think if they didn't do certain things the way that they did, it would have fallen apart.
Yeah.
But like with Daniel Radcliffe, it's just like it could have just very easily been like a cliche kind of like, oh, I'm a zombie. But just because of the direction, because of like how much Radcliffe was able to go into it, it's like Radcliffe kind of had, I bet you anything that Radcliffe was like off in his trailer just having these contemplative thoughts of like, what would it be like if I was a zombie and I was coming back from the dead, and what would that be for my character? You know?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about Paul Dano, though. I'm curious, what movie was it that you first discovered Paul Dano? Because Paul Dano, I feel like, is a guy that, you know, kind of comes onto the scene for people at different stages.
Might have been Little Miss Sunshine, maybe.
I think Little Miss Sunshine was his, probably not necessarily his debut, but his breakout. So yeah, that's appropriate. Yeah. That's an appropriate place to start. That was a
strong movie for him. What's that other one? It's based on a book, Running with Scissors, I think it's called.
Running with Scissors, yeah.
It's about like the family that's falling apart, and has like no idea how to be a person. Very, very socially awkward in it. That one was really good. I enjoyed him in Looper. He was absolutely tortured in Looper. Come on,
There Will Be Blood?
Yes, that's exactly what I was trying to think of. Yeah.
There Will Be Blood, I think, was his Who Were Divorced Until Then. I mean, I still love him in There Will Be Blood, but I think he carries this movie in a way that he just doesn't in There Will Be Blood.
He's so sad in all of his movies.
Well, that's the thing. He's kind of like, he kind of developed this running thing of just being this depressed, shrill person. And it's, I don't want to say it's typecasting because he does it really well, but here I think he kind of breaks out of it a bit. Here I almost think it's kind of like, it's an interesting reflection of the type of character that Paul Dano has been kind of typecast in to begin with. And then him kind of breaking out of that typecasting. Almost, I hate to go back to this example, but almost kind of like how Punch Drunk Love is kind of like an examination of Adam Sandler's like, you know, like idiot adult persona, and kind of like a real intense breakdown of that, and kind of getting to the core of what makes Adam Sandler tick and something like that. So, okay. So just from a filmmaking perspective, since I can't really talk about it myself, I mean, I was actually, Jacob, you'll laugh at this. I was just, you know, watching my Cloverdale film, my little fan film that I did at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. And yeah, I'm happy that I put it together. I'm not a filmmaker, but you, sir, you are a filmmaker. So you know, can you kind of talk about just what, from a filmmaking perspective, stood out to you about this movie? Like, just, you know, some of the shots, some of the composition, some of the way that the editing was done.
Yeah, this movie did several things very, very well. Visual storytelling is a big one. There's this aspect of show me, don't tell me. And there were, you know, whole extensions for minutes where there was no dialogue at all, or, you know, Paul Dano talking to himself and not, you know, interacting, but like the way that he would pick something up or look at something, we would understand what was going on. Like the sequence with, you know, where he's running out into the rain and grabbing the cup full of water and draining it and putting it back. And there's a sequence of the berries that we already talked about where he says nothing, but we know what's coming, we know what's happening, and they do a very good job of visually telling that story. And then, of course, him trying to like climb up the side of the ravine that they get stuck in, just failing horribly, and then trying to, like, you know, build contraptions and stuff to get out, and just not being able to do it until he gets help from Manny. That's very, very good storytelling. That shows, you know, these guys know how to tell a story without like having a character say, well, now we have to get to this place or else this thing will happen and it will cause problems for us, which is like the very, you know, lazy way to tell a story.
Batman versus Superman much?
Yeah, yes. The very lazy way to tell a story is to have somebody explain the story to the audience, and then have one of the other characters go, oh, I understand.
Right.
So, yeah, this movie did
none of that this movie. This movie was just all just from top to bottom. It was like, okay, like, we're going to hit you with some basically like abrasively weird shit right from the get-go, and you're gonna like see how you can take it. And if you can take it, if you can get past the abrasively weird, then I almost feel like the first 5 minutes is almost kind of like a litmus test for people, where it's like, all right, if they don't walk out of the theater after that, then they might appreciate the movie.
Yeah. I also felt like the dialogue was very good. When they did have sequences with extended dialogue, they came up with, clever, interesting things that, you don't typically see in movies. The whole sequence about like masturbation and how it like makes him think of his mom. There's like the weird connection.
Oh God.
Daniel Radcliffe just like, very, very seriously and with, like compassion in his heart says, Hank, when I masturbate, I'm going to think about your mom. It's like, well, then it won't be weird anymore because I'm thinking about it too. And
you're absolutely right. Dana Radcliffe delivers that with just like all the fucking conviction in the world.
Yeah, and he's like compassionate because he like, he's upset that Hank is upset. So, so to me, that's there's those kind of moments where it's just, very strong conviction. From an outside perspective, it's very funny, but within the context of the movie, it's very touching that you have these, characters who care about each other and they just, are awkwardly expressing it. They don't really have an easy way to connect, and they're slowly building that throughout the movie. So I would say the dialogue is very strong as well. And then originality, absolutely.
Oh, God, yes.
There's almost nothing in this movie that I think I could find in another movie. I can find good editing, I can find good cinematography, but the type of story that they're telling, the type of the way that the characters interact, I don't think you can really find in a whole lot of other movies. So it's very memorable because of that.
I honestly think the closest comparison is Castaway.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's far off because with Castaway, it's literally just the volleyball instead of another actor. But it's the closest comparison I can think of in terms of the story where it's like, okay, this guy is kind of like learning to cope with himself through talking to this thing that may or may not. I mean, in Castaway, obviously, it's not like you're having hallucinations of Wilson, like, "Hey, buddy." I don't know. That would have made Castaway a more entertaining movie. Actually, now that I think about it,
I'm not the biggest Tom Hanks fan. He's good, but I don't know if he's as good as people think he is.
No, I'm not the biggest. I mean, I like him. I just I think he's a little one note some of the time. Yeah. Anyways. But okay, yeah. I mean, I just absolutely think the originality for sure is just a big plus with this movie. But one thing I want to kind of get into before we wrap up, I think we're kind of getting to the end here, unless. But one thing I do want to get into is just kind of like the accessibility of this movie. Like, how accessible do you think this is to a mass audience versus people like us that are just like really into, these like experimental, like auteur directors and bold filmmaking choices and stuff like that.
Yeah. I definitely feel like this is a movie for young people right now. I don't think, I definitely couldn't, get my parents to watch this movie with me. They would just think it was too gross or too weird. Or, like if, it's even some of like, my older cousins, I don't think would get into it. This is a movie for young people because it's, the whole idea of like social anxieties and, our culture where we rely so heavily on smartphones and tablets and the internet and Facebook is great, but unfortunately it doesn't help us build human connections very well. So he starts out desperately trying to get signal for his phone so he can figure out where he is, and he eventually stops giving a shit about the phone entirely and is just focused on hanging out with Manny and trying to get off the island. I think that's a key into what people, what they're going for. They want, they want us to think about our social interactions with each other and, how we make connections. That's the heart and soul of the movie.
Yeah,
so
no,
I don't think it's the most accessible. I think that in general, we're a little bit saucier than previous generations before us. We like our R-rated movies. We like our, our cursing and our violence more than previous generations do. So,
I don't necessarily think this movie has a lot of like cursing and violence in it. I just think
sure it's got some adult themes. When I masturbate, I'm going to think about your mom. That's like
okay, yeah, fair enough.
My parents would, at that point they would just be like, "Oh, this is gross. This is disgusting. I don't want to watch any more of this." So I don't know. I mean, that's not to say that there aren't any adults who wouldn't like it, or people who are, older than we are, but I see a little bit of that aim in terms of the audience. I definitely think if you don't like this specific type of humor, it's tough to get into regardless of age. You kind of have to get past the first 15-20 minutes where Manny is not talking, but once you get into that relationship, I think it's more relatable.
Yeah, I think it's a slow build for sure. And not to say that the movie starts out slow, because I really do like some of the directorial choices that go on. I love the way that the music's introduced, how Paul Dano just kind of starts to slowly hum it, and then it starts to work its way into the soundtrack. I think that whole opening sequence is really well constructed and really is just kind of like, okay, like, from the minute we see Paul Dano on the island to when we see them like going away, and then we see the title. It's just that whole thing is just really well constructed. But at the same time, like I say, there's some embraceably weird fart humor in there as well.
Yes.
I don't know. Like, if I wasn't prepared for that, then I probably would have been like really, really turned off. Having said that, I went into this movie being like, okay, there's going to be some fart jokes, but they're going to do things with it. So, all right. Speaking of which, I feel like they actually make a lot of bodily functions into legit plot devices, which I think is a clever thing to do.
Yeah.
Like the farts being the propeller that gets them out of situations, and then the machine gun thing that they use. The
the hammer chop and snapping the fingers creates the fire.
And then Manny's vomited water becomes like basically Paul Dano's water source, which is disgusting and hilarious.
Yes.
Oh god.
I was reading after I went to the screening. I wanted to go online and read more about it, and I guess at Sundance there were people who were walking out of the theater after the first 10 minutes or the first 15 minutes. At the end, there was only a handful of the people in the theater who were there at the beginning. I was thinking you weren't at least even a little curious on where they were going with this.
Right.
I've seen bad movies that I have purposely stayed till the end for, because I wanted to see where they were going with it. I wanted to know what this weird setup was for. But that's just who I am, I guess. But my real thought was I was in a theater with probably 15 other people, and I had a couple of my buddies with me, but nobody left. So was my audience that I went with, and all the strangers that were with us, were we different somehow from the Sundance audience? What was it that made them want to leave? And nobody in my theater left. There are definitely moments where I heard people behind me go "Oh, gross," or
But I think that's just kind of part of the experience, though.
Yes.
It's just kind of the directors intentionally want you to be it's all part of the human condition. Like I said, this is it's crazy that a movie about a fucking farting corpse could explore the human condition, but it does. It explores how human beings as a whole are just generally disgusting kind of creatures in a way. It's there's a lot of just habitual things that go on with human beings that we just kind of have to address. And then, of course, all the things that we can get into with Manny and I'm sorry, I keep forgetting Paul Dano's character. Hank.
Yeah.
With Manny and Hank, their relationship and everything. Just really, it's just a film that just touches on so many different issues with the base outline of, oh yeah, it's Paul Dano dragging around a farting corpse played by Dano Radcliffe.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to discuss the ending with you.
Okay, let's do it, and then I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, the whole sequence after he comes back to Sarah, I believe it is, the girl, and then
Mary Elizabeth Winstead.
Yep, and then Manny dies again, and the ambulance shows up, and he's being interviewed for the news and everything. Was a good sequence, and I initially thought oh, this is going to be a sloppy ending because they're gonna have him like meet, and then it's gonna be like a weird reconciliation. He's gonna explain stuff, and they're gonna be like they won't get together, but they'll be like friends or something. And I was completely off.
Oh no!
Yeah, how I expected it was gonna go. I just thought it was gonna be way worse than it was when I saw them like coming into the backyard and everything. But I think they handled it really well, because I think Hank needed to address the aspects of his character. At first, he's he can't even talk to her, he can't even say anything, but eventually when he's on the news, he he almost like gets away with saying, well, I'm Manny and this is Hank. Even his dad's like, he can't open it, and he almost gets away with avoiding any type of social conflict, which is what he's done up until that point. It's the whole the whole point of the journey together was for him to learn how to handle social conflict of some kind, and how to grow and interact with other humans. It's like his whole character arc. So he says in front of everybody, yes, I am Hank, that's Manny. He says, yes, this guy was alive, yes, he had goofy powers. He says that knowing full well that everybody is going to be looking at him like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Of course, yeah.
So he does the right thing, and he stands up for what he believes in, and he doesn't care what people think about him, because that's a really good thing. And at the end we have a very dramatic moment. Spoilers. I won't.
Yeah, spoiler alert right here. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
This is basically the one thing in the movie that you need to kind of have a spoiler alert for. But go ahead.
The first fart makes you laugh, and the last fart makes you cry.
Oh God.
Because he admits it. I farted. It was me. It was me. And his dad's just like, okay. But for him, it was a big step, because social conflict, or like doing something
like Paul
weird.
Dano and him have like a really deep conversation about that subject that kind of gets into like a lot of other aspects of humanity, like we've been talking about.
Yeah, you're my friend, but you can't fart in front of me.
Oh God.
So yeah, I think his character is a great ending, in terms of that arc, and what happens next doesn't really matter as much, because his character learned something valuable about interaction. Like, it's okay to to be weird sometimes. It's okay to do things that might make other people look at you. That's fine. So yeah, I thought it was a great ending. And having the ambiguity on the faces of the the other characters, watching Daniel Radcliffe zip away into the waves was pretty fun.
Yeah, like I said, I definitely see where you're coming from, in terms of like, there is a lot of development on Manny's part in terms of coming to terms with his character as well, and it is a very interesting exploration of like, well, shit, I was dead, now I'm alive. What is this? What is life? It's very contemplative, like deep stuff that he's dealing with. And so, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. But I also definitely think it was intentional, where since it is Paul Dano on the island by himself, and Paul Dano, his character starts out very unhinged and very crazy, I definitely think there's room for interpretation that, it was Manny was a manifestation of Paul Dano. And but at any rate, I think whichever interpretation you want to look at it, I think you could just like watch this movie with one interpretation, like, and then watch it the next day with a different interpretation and enjoy it just as much.
Yeah. No, I absolutely get where you're coming from on that, and I think they did a lot to leave it ambiguous. So I like that we took a lot of the same things away from the movie, but have slightly different opinions about that. That's interesting, and that's there's not a whole lot of movies that can do that, where it's you either have completely devices, loved it, hated it. Not too many movies where you can have a different interpretation and still both really enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and I think that is a perfect way to end the conversation, Jacob. So thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. I was super stoked to have somebody to talk about this movie with.
Oh, I know. And for my money, I think this is the first long-form podcast on YouTube talking about this movie. So I think we're making new ground. I'm hoping that this movie catches on, because I definitely think there's a lot of things to get into. There's a lot of things to dissect about this movie. And once more people discover it, I think, conversations like this will probably be like, I don't want to say commonplace, but I think once people discover this movie, they're going to want to have conversations just like the one we just had. So, all right. So, Jacob, if you don't mind, can I do my Edith Bunker impression for the movie machine?
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to the Movie Machine podcast at hotchocolatemedia.net. Oh, Archie, it's what happens when 4 funny people take a random story generator and improvise a movie really, really fast, Archie. That's what they do, Archie. They're really funny people. All right, see you guys later. hotchocolatemedia.net.
Thanks,
Oh, Movie Machine podcast.